Welcome everyone to what we hope will be an engaging session. I know many of you have already been participating in other sessions so far in the conference, and it has quite a few really great sessions. So we're really pleased to be here today. Thanks to Excel and Ed for inviting us to put this session together on the importance and strategies for increasing student post-secondary transitions from high school into college. My name is Matt Gandel. I'm President and CEO of Education Strategy Group. We're a strategic consulting firm that works across the country to help improve student transitions, help states and communities and regions adopt policies and practices that really increase high school success, college and career readiness, and ultimately post-secondary participation and success. We've done a lot of work looking at that through line and ultimately what it takes to then successfully transition into meaningful and well-paying careers as well. And today I'm going to give a little background, and then I'm going to invite my two guests into a conversation with me about strategies they're undertaking in their states and in their communities to try to improve the performance of their schools and increase post-secondary readiness and transitions. Real quick, some housekeeping for those who are new to this system. It's an impressive and intricate system that Excel and Ed has put in place for the virtual conference. Later on, we'll have some time for Q&A. And if you look at your chat bar in the top of your screen, there's a Q&A function within that feature where you can, anytime during the conversation, feel free to put questions online. And when we get back to that point a little bit later in the hour, I'll take some of those questions and put them back to Superintendent Martinez and Commissioner Lovers. Real quick, context I'm going to provide before we get into the discussion really comes back to, for us in our work and what we've seen with many of you around the country, that the importance of post-secondary credentials to student success. I think we all realize that we're no longer in a world where a high school diploma is a guarantee of anything. We all worked very hard to increase high school graduation rates in our communities and our states across the country over the last decade plus, and have done really well by that. But the bar has been raised, and the economy demands more than that. So I think today we all recognize that to be successful, you need a credential beyond the high school diploma, either a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, or a meaningful credential, non-degree credential. And much of what we're going to talk about today is what can be done to make that the new normal from a policy and practice perspective. A couple of years ago, ESG was part of launching a coalition that made this the priority. You'll see on the screen some of the national organizations that are in this coalition called Level Up. And it was designed to really create this new narrative about success in K-12 means transitioning into post-secondary and obtaining another credential beyond the high school diploma. And we focused over the last few years on what are the mutually reinforcing policies and incentives that need to be in place to cause that to happen at a much greater extent than it's happening today. What's the state role in that? What's the regional and local role? What can philanthropy do? We've come out with a lot of tools and strategies that we've put forward as a collective group of organizations. We're really excited about the work that's been done so far to shine the spotlight on this. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by two members of a national advisory committee that we created for Level Up, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. But we put together a group of practitioners who are leading this work at the state level and the local level, and also some national organization leaders to guide what this coalition has done and will do going into the future. This summer, the coalition put a report out that really took a careful look at what the data says about students who are transitioning on to college from high school. And we revealed a pretty alarming trend, which is that in 7,000 high schools in the US, there are 7,000 high schools where students of color and those from low-income families have a less than 50% chance of enrolling directly in post-secondary education after high school. That's 1/3 of all US high schools. And we call these coin flip high schools. Essentially, it's a flip of a coin whether students will go on to college or not, which we think is really a tragedy and something we need to focus on as a nation. If you look at the numbers of students, that translates into 1 million students every year that will not go on to college from high school in the US. And the majority of these students, unfortunately, are Black, Hispanic, or low-income students. So we think that we came out with this report right at the time when the nation was highly focused on systemic racism and trying to take a careful look in the mirror at what generations of systemic racism has done to students of color and their opportunities to succeed. And we really believe that we've found at least part of the solution that we put forward in this report, which is what could be done to harness data that makes a difference in young people going on to college from high school, particularly students of color, evidence-based practices and data that can be used to really turn the tide on this situation. And that's what was focused on in that report. We had, I'll come back to this in a minute, but we looked at communities across the country that have really flipped the script on that data, where a much more significant proportion of their students, particularly students of color and low-income students, are successfully going on to college from high school. And we try to get a better feel for what their strategies were. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. But then, of course, COVID hit as we were putting this report out, and we've seen even more alarming data just this fall in terms of student enrollment in college and readiness for college. We saw a 16% decline in undergraduate enrollment for first-time students in the US. As of yesterday, there's been a 15.5% decline in FAFSA completion rates across the US over the year before, and about a 30% approximately of students this fall changed their plans for post-secondary education, either not enrolling or changing from, say, a 4-year college to a 2-year institution and staying closer to home. And again, across all these data points, the numbers go up for students of color. So COVID has really increased this crisis to an alarming level, and we're all looking for solutions. Particularly right now, if we look at the seniors and the juniors in our high schools across the country, we are all needing to work to make sure we don't have a lost COVID cohort, a group of students who fall out of the system for one reason or another, decide not to go on or can't go on to college, and then ultimately pay the price for the rest of their lives, not having economic opportunity and mobility. So back to the report. The positive part of the report is that we found communities that really were making a difference, and we looked at their strategies. And one of the things that we uncovered is that they take a look at the data, and they found some key data points that really make a difference in students' ability to go on and enroll and succeed in college. And we've identified these data points and called them the momentum metrics, which you can see here on the screen. And we've organized them into 3 categories of metrics that we're encouraging states and communities to report on and adopt and use in their everyday practices. The first have to do with preparing for college. So are students academically prepared to move on and succeed in college? We've identified 3: 9th grade GPA, potential for advanced coursework, and high quality pathway participation. All 3 make a meaningful difference in students' abilities to go on and succeed in college. 9th grade GPA is a big predictor of 11th grade GPA and of college enrollment and success. Potential for advanced coursework means the percentage of students who have taken at least one advanced course, AP, IB, or dual enrollment course, and then they have a high degree of likelihood to continue to take more advanced courses and ultimately enroll and succeed in college. So just taking that one course makes a huge difference. And then the third is participating in high quality CTE pathways that are tied to in-demand and higher wage jobs. Ultimately, that's shown to be a big differentiator in students going on actually to college, not just into careers, but going on to college first and then going into careers. So that's preparing. Then we also went on to look at applying. So these are pretty straightforward, but really important. We think the ability to understand what % of students actually submit at least 2 college applications, because those who submit at least 2 are more likely to be accepted by at least one 4-year institution. The % who complete the FAFSA, it's one of the biggest differentiators in terms of a step students can take not only to get the financial aid, but ultimately the confidence, stability to be able to ultimately enroll and attend college. And then third, importantly, college match, which looks at the level of academic preparation that students have and whether they're applying to colleges that are at the level of rigor they could actually succeed in, rather than aiming lower perhaps than they're capable of achieving. And then third and finally, we look at enrollment data. So we don't want to stop with when students leave high school. We want to see if they've seamlessly enrolled in college. Seamless enrollment is a big indicator of ultimate college success. And then their ability to succeed in that first gateway set of courses in their freshman year of college. So taken together, these indicators, we believe, would make a huge difference if states and systems would adopt them and make them the kind of the central narrative for what schools focus on, what high schools focus on, and in partnership with colleges, what they're working together to try to increase performance on. The good news is all 50 states have this data available. It is readily accessible data if you look around the country. We think that's the good news. The bad news is only 11 states right now incorporate 2 or more of these metrics into their accountability or performance funding measures for at least for K-12 schools. So while there's been a big shift in state accountability systems to try to measure college and career readiness, what we found is that these indicators that have shown to be the biggest predictors of post-secondary transitions and success are still utilized in only a small number of states as the kind of predominant metrics that are reported on and used to incentivize increased performance. So in our report, we strongly encourage states to take a careful look at these metrics and determine ways they may be able to make them more central to their systems. And then the final point I want to make before I move to the discussion with our guests is whether practitioners have in access to this data, which is perhaps the most important question. And unfortunately, the answer is they really don't at the levels that we need them to. This is a RAND study that was done just within the last year, looking at high school principals and teachers' access to some of the data that I just described. And you'll see that principals have access to more data than teachers, but only about 2/3 of principals have access even to information as rudimentary as where students applied and were accepted and enrolled in college from their high schools. And then far fewer principals have access to data about whether those students need to be remediated in their first year of college. If you turn to teachers, the numbers go way down. Less than 40% of teachers know where students applied, their students are accepted and enrolled in college, and less than 20% have information about remediation rates of their students. So at the end of the day, if those who are leading high schools and the classroom teachers don't have access to this information, it will be hard, we believe, to help them improve the performance of these students on these very metrics. So this all goes back to the power of data and transparency and incentives around the right data. And that's exactly what we want to talk about today. So I'm going to transition to our guests. I'm really excited to have 2 of the foremost leaders in the country who are working on these issues joining us today. First, I'd like to introduce Teresa Lubbers, who serves as the Indiana Commissioner for Higher Education. Indiana has done some incredible work on student transitions, and Teresa has been a stalwart supporter and leader of that work, not only in Indiana, but in networks across the country with her peers who lead higher education systems in other parts of the country. And I'm also pleased to be joined by Pedro Martinez, who is the superintendent in the San Antonio Independent School District in Texas, which serves approximately 50,000 students across 90 schools. And under his leadership, San Antonio has undertaken tremendous efforts to increase college going, resulting in substantial increases in college enrollment, in FAFSA completion, many of the metrics that I just referred to a few minutes ago. He also serves as the chair of the national organization Chiefs for Change, and Chiefs for Change is one of the ESG's partners in the Level Up Coalition. So welcome, Teresa, welcome, Pedro, and let's jump in to a conversation about how to turn the tide on this. I'll start with you, Pedro. We were just talking before everyone joined in about how hard this year has been, and in this moment, how many pressures you're facing just to keep schools open and keep students safe, and that makes it hard to have larger strategic priorities that you keep attending to. But can you just step back and tell us, why did your district make supporting students post-secondary transitions such a big priority? And then later we'll come back to how you're maintaining that prioritization in this COVID moment.
No, absolutely, man. And thank you for having me. You know, it goes back to what you said earlier. We've always known that post-secondary options and access is the key for mobility, for economic mobility. And for me, in a district that has 90% poverty, 97% of children of color, whenever I see any of the stats that you just shared, I immediately look at my students. And I start asking myself, you know, is it fair that just because my students are in the zip codes they are, that they're going to have less access and less opportunity? And so this has been really not just a job for me, but an obsession, a mission, something that we have to solve, because not only is it the right thing to solve for our children, but frankly, our country needs it, our communities need it. There's no way, you know, there's no better way to not only advance economically and to escape poverty, but also just to have just a decent life in our society today. When you look at the pandemic that we are going through, it is one of the cruelest pandemics that it is affecting disproportionately children of poverty and families of poverty, children and families who have less education. So you know, in some, you know, I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but for me, I just think it's just so important that children and students have options. And what I tell our teachers is that many times children can't see sometimes what's potentially what's available to them in their futures. And so it's up to us as adults to give them all the tools so they can make those kind of choices, informed choices, and really ensure that, again, they have the best chance for a good life.
Thank you. Well said. Teresa, let's follow on that with your approach in Indiana. And again, back to the grim realities of this year and the data that I pointed out about how many students are opting out of the system and not going on to college, particularly students of color. How are you approaching this in Indiana to try to keep students on track and kind of double down on some of the strategies you put in place? What are you doing, and where might you go next?
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to join you and Pedro for what I think is a really important discussion, and I look forward to the questions as well. We certainly know that the racial gaps on college going and college success existed before, but we also know that learning losses that we're seeing now are occurring disproportionately with low income and students of color. And it's in math, and it's in reading, and it's in college going and college success and college enrollment. So I think all of these issues have really caused us to double down on our efforts before. In Indiana, probably like many other states, we've invested a portion of, the commission has invested a portion of our Gear Up dollars to actually look at the learning losses that are occurring right now through programs like tutoring, summer bridge programs that we know are directed especially for students who are most likely to be left behind. We didn't have a lot of money to do this, but we actually provided funding to 11 school districts in Indiana, partnerships between K-12 and higher education to really look at what we could do to minimize the learning loss that was taking place. It's a small percentage of the overall schools, but we're hoping that we can scale the successful results of those programs going forward. We also used $61 million of our CARES dollars, the governor's discretionary funds, to look at what we know is another problem, which is connectivity and devices and the professional development that we need to actually pivot to a remote and virtual instruction for students, both in K-12 and higher education. It was distributed to school corporations and to communities and to colleges. We actually reached about 670,000 students in Indiana through those dollars to actually begin to address some of those issues. We've actually used two new initiatives in Indiana. What we've discovered is that often we have state programs and government programs, but we never really reach the people where they are and what they really need to hear. So we looked at this, and in 2019, we identified communities in Indiana that had high Hispanic and Latino populations, and we hired what we call star parents, Padres Estrellas, to actually be our on-the-ground ability to reach these students. We actually are asking them to especially help sign up for our early college program, our Promise program, which is called the 21st Century Scholars Program, and to actually reach the adults through our tuition-free Workforce Ready grant program. And we find that these trusted advisors in their community are successful. We've now scaled that to what we call the Ambassadors Program with areas in the state that have high Black populations, with a similar concept to really reach people through community organizations, faith-based organizations, to get the message out. But equity has been something that we've been focused on at the Commission for a long time. We actually, in 2013, passed a resolution to close the achievement gap by 2025, which is the year that we have our 60% goal, that 60% of Hoosiers would have credentials beyond high school. We know that we can't get there without closing the gaps for students of color, low-income students, and returning adults. And then finally, before we go on, we years ago decided we disaggregate all of our reports, our college readiness reports, our college completion reports, but we decided that we wanted to do a special equity report, which really looked at what programs do we have that could address the disparities that exist. And so both in our strategic plan, we call out equity, and we have a separate equity report that disaggregates all of our data. Not surprisingly, we found out that, while we have 64% of our students who are graduating with dual credit, for our Black population, it was less than 50%, and for our Hispanic population, it was 52%, a big disparity. We also discovered, what we thought we knew, which is that our students of color were taking the general diploma, not the academic honors diploma. So we identified strategies as well. So those are just a few of the things that we've been doing through our strategic planning in Indiana.
Thank you, Teresa. In a minute, I want to come back to a couple of those strategies and let you unpack them a little bit, like 21st Century Scholars as an example. But let me go on to Superintendent Martinez for a minute on where I started earlier in terms of strategic use of data, because I've been really impressed with how you've made data your ally and really picked some key data points to drive and prioritize in your district and have seen real results. Can you talk to us a little bit more about which data you focused on and what you've done and what you're seeing as a result?
Sure, Matt. So, for us, first of all of our work is based around giving more access to students, right? Because that's one of the challenges that I see across the nation, is that many of our children of poverty, of color, don't get enough access. So, for example, we focused a lot on exposing children to dual credit, advanced placement classes, international baccalaureate classes that really can help them get college credit before they finish high school. And one of the things that I'm very proud of in the last 5 years, we've closed the gap between the state and our district, even though the demographics of our state are very different than our district. So with 97% children of color and 90% poverty, almost half of our students are now graduating with college credit coming from dual credit AP as well as IB courses. We also have almost double the number of children that are getting associate's degrees while they're finishing their high school diploma. And so we're expanding significantly our early college programs, and we're now tying them also to specific industries like technology and healthcare, because those are some of the big industries in San Antonio. I'm very proud that this last year we competed with most of the urban cities in the country, and we beat everybody out in terms of FAFSA completion. Almost 90% of my children finish their FAFSA. We know that's a leading indicator. And of course, applications. We have now over 90% of my students are applying, and over 80% are getting into college, with the majority of them, as you said earlier, Matt, multiple applications. My top quartile children apply to 9 different colleges, 3 safety schools, 3 schools that are reach schools, and we call it 3 dream schools. And so for us, just giving them that access. Of course, COVID has been challenging for us, but these are goals that we refuse to let on. And frankly, we learn a lot as we have these initiatives and monitor this data.
Impressive, very impressive. I think 90% FAFSA, the highest state level numbers were 70%, I think, or 70 to 80%. So that's very impressive. Tell me about how you've used, just to go back on this, you got to those results by using those metrics to drive and incentivize performance, correct? How have you done that? Yeah,
so Matt, so a lot of it has really been, and it really goes back to what you said earlier, is how do we engage our high schools, principals, teachers, counselors. We have college advisors at every single high school, and really leveraging the data where we have academic plans for every student. And so I'll tell you, we're still early in the work. I'll just say this. So a lot of our work does focus on 11th and 12th graders, but it's really working with the students and really looking at making sure, again, they have good options around access around specifically to the type of colleges that are going to be the right fit for them. Of course, the earlier work that we start is really in middle school around making sure they're prepared for advanced courses. So we have really monitored giving access. For example, one of our key metrics is making sure that our middle school children have as much access to high school credit, whether that's algebra, whether that's AP Spanish, some of the CT courses now that we're trying to also have. We're bringing those down to the high school. So when you leverage those data points along with having really strong college advising for juniors and seniors, tying that together, that's where we're seeing the best success. Now, our biggest challenge going forward is tracking the students after high school. So that's the biggest frustration, where we're seeing really good leading indicator data around college readiness, and all of our metrics are all hitting the right places. Our biggest challenge is making sure that we can follow the children through after high school and making sure that we support them as best we can, because again, they're no longer in our system.
Interesting. Let's come back to that. You mean even those who stay in state, you have a hard time tracking what happens to them in college? Yeah,
Matt. I mean, unfortunately, this is an area of work for all of us, I think, where how do we make it easier for connections? Because it goes back to what you said earlier. If my principals and teachers have more information, that's going to help them be a lot more action oriented, right? And so making sure that we know, hey, if children are struggling in college, whether it's in certain courses, whether it's in math or in English, how do we make sure that our staff know that so that they can make the proper adjustments? And unfortunately, our systems are just not interconnected enough. A lot of it is informal. A lot of it is me, asking our college presidents, can I get some information? But even there, it's just not seamless. And most of the public data is very outdated. It's about, usually it's about 2 years old. It isn't actionable for me.
I think, Matt, that's so important, I think, to make sure that this relationship between K-12 and higher education is smoother in terms of providing that kind of information. One of the things that we have been fairly successful in doing in Indiana is actually providing in our college readiness report the kind of data that you're talking about, Pedro, and our high schools are waiting for that information. So we follow those students from high school to college, what they study, if they needed remediation, do they persist past the first semester, do they finish all their credits that they took, and we provide that information back to our K-12 partners, and they're using that in very actionable ways. Then our obligation is to follow them all the way through their college experience. And are they graduating? Are they graduating on time? How much debt are they leaving with? All the things that we know stand in the way of completion as well. I think it really speaks to the need to have this aligned system where there is this soft handoff, and we don't pretend like at one point I did my job, now you do yours, but instead we do these jobs together. So we feel really committed to disaggregating all of our data and our reports at the statewide level, and then providing that to all of the people who need that, including the practitioners, the people who are in the classroom. So we do that with the report that I mentioned earlier, the readiness report, the completion report, our equity report. We do a dual credit report. We know, for example, that in the case of dual credit or AP, while I mentioned earlier, while we now are successfully getting 64% of our students to graduate with early college credit, but for our Black population, it's 39%. For our Hispanic population, it's 52%. And so it's one thing to know that number. It's another thing to drive policies that change those numbers, which is what we're really engaged in doing in multiple ways, including trying to have more diversity in our classroom in terms of our teachers. We know that we've really worked hard to change those numbers so that students don't leave their experience never having a teacher who looks like them. And there are lots of strategies, and that's certainly one of them. I commend you on your FAFSA numbers. We are certainly advocating for requiring the completion of FAFSA for all high school students before they graduate. We'll be addressing this again in our budget session this year. We've made some progress. We still have some folks who are skeptical, So we're going to have to continue to work on that as well. And then to say, before we move on, I think, getting students ready is critically important, getting them to enroll. And then once they get there, they can't be anonymous, especially first generation students. So what are we doing to make sure that they're successful when they get there? So among those things are, we've redesigned, as many states have, how we provide remediation to students using a co-requisite model. So we don't put them in standalone remediation courses. We put them in credit-bearing courses from day one. And the success rate has gone up dramatically for those students. Plus, they aren't using their financial aid for non-credit bearing work.
Helpful, Carrie. So as you were talking about co-requisite remediation in college, it's funny, a few of my colleagues and I have been talking about whether we might want to adopt a similar strategy in high school. I was interested, Pedro, how you talked about moving dual credit down to middle school, essentially how to earn high school credits in middle school. We might want to take some lessons from colleges that have figured out how to help students through gateway courses, through co-requisite remediation, and bring that into high school around higher level courses and provide supports around the edges and encourage more and more students in. Now, you may be very well doing that. If you've increased your numbers, I'm guessing you've had to find ways to increase the supports for students who are reaching higher and taking those courses. But just a thought I was having as Teresa spoke. Can we stay on the state role for a minute? Because we often get a lot of state policymakers and legislators who are participants in the Excel in Ed conference looking for good ideas. Superintendent Martinez, can you talk to us about what Texas did over the last couple of years to try to incentivize performance of students in high school, college readiness, essentially, the pretty dramatic legislative activity that created some incentives. Can you break that down and tell us how that's playing out for folks?
Yeah, so Matt, I'm really excited the fact that our state, this was part of our advocacy work back in the 2019 session. We passed probably the largest funding overhaul and really even a reform overhaul academically that Texas has ever done in at least 3 decades. And it was something that we were very proud of, and we were able to shape quite a bit of it. And one of the things that was great was an incentive for school districts to get more of their children to graduate college ready. And as long as, and basically it's not small, it's just under $2,000 per child. And what's great is that it's using all the metrics that we've always, that we've been advocating for, which is kids, passing AP courses and exams, international baccalaureate courses, dual credit, doing well on the SAT and ACT, as well as here we have the TSI, which is similar to the AccuPlacer in other states, so that we don't have children taking remedial classes when they leave us. And so those components, which were already data points we were already leveraging, and we already had included them in the accountability system with our state commissioner. Now they have a financial incentive. And one of the things that that I saw that I've seen in our state of Texas is we've been very strong around accountability, in ELA and math and the core subjects, but we weren't as strong historically around, or really as encouraging around college readiness. And so that has really shifted now in Texas, because we've seen, of course, what Teresa has mentioned about earlier, that when you look at children's success in college, it doesn't. They're not born in college, right? I mean, they really has to go back to pre-K-12 and preparation and readiness. And so now we have alignment between our accountability system. We have alignment between now funding incentives. And for us, I think over time, I mean, it's still early, but give us 5 or 10 years, I think you're going to see Texas see a significant improvement around college persistence and completion, which right now our state frankly lags most states in the country.
Really exciting to watch that, and to look at the array of measures that have been put in place around these incentives. So it's not just the traditional metrics and assessment scores that have driven performance for so long. There's so much, as we talked about earlier, so many more metrics that matter when it comes to the transition from K-12 into higher ed that exists. And it's going to be interesting to see with Texas putting resources and incentives behind it, how that changes the numbers that I was talking about earlier. Obviously, states are entering into a period where they won't have a lot of extra resources, right? Tight budget, shrinking budgets, perhaps some more CARES Act dollars to do creative things like Teresa was talking about earlier. But I'm hopeful that Texas and other states will still find ways to create these incentives and put the spotlight on these issues, even if there's not as much money as there was when you passed this law. Teresa, do you have any thoughts on, just coming back to the role of the state, in creative ways the state can incentivize attention to these metrics that I mentioned earlier, and also just frankly just create an environment where it's more the norm and not the exception for K-12 schools to be working hand in hand with the higher ed institutions to make sure there's a smooth handoff?
Well, I think it's important for students early to see themselves as college material. So I have to put in a plug for the 21st Century Scholars Program in Indiana. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary of this program this year, which is low-income students sign up in 7th and 8th grade, and they then have, at the end of their high school, have free tuition at our colleges and universities in Indiana. The important thing about that program is it's not just a scholarship program. It's designed as an aspiration, preparation scholarship. You get students early to see themselves as college material. You then use those 4 years in high school to prepare them, including, making a statement about what kind of high school diploma they get, making sure that they do all of those kinds of things, many of which are like the momentum points that we talk about, that we know are going to increase the likelihood that they will go to college and be successful. And then you provide the scholarship. We have a scholar success program in high school. We are now instituting a scholar success program in college that aligns what they're learning with what they're going to do. But I think, the important thing about this is, there may be no singular answer to the kinds of issues we're talking about the disparities. But I will tell you that we don't have the disparities with the 21st century scholars when they graduate. Our college going rate for Hoosiers at large is 61%. Our college going rate for 21st century scholars is 86%. They are going to college, they are succeeding. They are our only population in Indiana that are on target to close the achievement gap by 2025. No other population that's low income is on target to close that. So needless to say, we are using every opportunity we have to promote this program. It's not inexpensive. It's a first dollar program, but it works. And so I think part of it is, as I said, you put in place the expectations that are aligned to what we know is most likely to make students successful. And they see themselves. I mean, when they complete dual credit or AP, they're going to college. Or they're doing some sort of an industry certification through their CTE programs that prepares them. So I think I think it is one way to align the financial aid with the policies that work. It's not enough just to provide scholarships, as important as affordability is. You have to align it with readiness as well.
Very impressive. So you have that's a student-facing incentive and financial support. Texas has a school-based incentive approach where dollars are flowing. In each case, you're making investments. I would agree that in the long run, they will be more than worth it. So I'm hopeful that in both of your states, you'll be able to continue the investment so that it can continue to bear fruit. There are some questions coming in from the audience, and I thought I would just turn to a few of those questions. And again, encourage anyone who wants to put additional questions in to go to your chat feature and the Q&A button under the chat. Just a few that have come in so far. I think, Pedro, you had mentioned advising earlier, and I know this is something Indiana's been working hard on. One of the questions is, how do you bring together college and career advising in the sort of high school to post-secondary setting, knowing that increasingly it's important not just to know that you're going to get into college and attend, but that you have some understanding of the pathways and the program that you might want to attend when you're there. I think you're on mute. You're on mute, Pedro. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Very proud of my state because, I've been here now 6 years, and Texas was already doing a lot of work around alignment of course sequences and around career tech and college. And so one of the things that is built in sort of into our system is when we're looking at children, we are looking at them in middle school. So we're developing pathways for them, and we don't see college and career as separate. We see them together. So I'll give you an example. We increased the number of children graduating with certificates, career certificates, that help them to college from 17 4 years ago to now over 500. And we graduate about 2,600 children a year. And those numbers are going to continue to rise, while half of my students are also graduating with college credit coming right out of high school, including a significant growing number of associate degrees. And so for us, we don't see them as separate. So the number one thing is you can't separate them. Put them together, and it really is around helping children understand, figuring out what is their passion. And one of the things I tell families, Matt, is that, look, I may have a child who's interested in medicine, right, in the science world. And so we have great programs around that, and we even have a school called CAS Med that focuses on those kind of fields. And if they don't like it, because maybe they don't like blood, or they don't like, dissecting, well, you know what? They found out in high school, right? And meanwhile, what's the worst of it? They took a lot of science and math, right? Never will hurt a child. And so for us, those are the conversations we have with parents, and it's really just exposing them. And what we're finding more and more, especially in today's world, are young children. When you expose them to just being able to see these different fields, you'd be surprised how that just creates more motivation for them. So now they'll do much better in algebra and in biology because they see the connection. But we are learning that it starts in middle school, and you gotta have the actual courses. It can't be just like an advising class. It literally is, you're gonna take these courses, and they start in middle school. And we have things like construction, we have manufacturing, we have, even the trades are even built in. And so again, I'm curious to see over time how this develops. And then of course, the community colleges are key. So we partner with the community colleges to get them access to the dual credit. So that way I tell my children, look, you're already in college. So it's not about whether you go to college or not, you're already in college. So it's a decision for you how far you want to go along. Get your certificate, or if you want to go further for an associate's or bachelor's degree, that's completely your choice.
Super helpful messaging and setting up that culture that way, and then understanding. Teresa, any thoughts on the advising challenge and how to bring these worlds together, including how to bring the high school and college advising together into greater alignment?
Well, I love the idea of the way we're talking about this in terms of right fit for the students. We talk about, right fit for the students based on their aspirations, their preparations, and the needs of the economy. And that means that it really does require the individualization of education in many ways, and career pathways. And so we have to change the way we talk about these things. And I think it does require an alignment of the systems from early childhood education to lifelong learning, with understanding that the opportunities that people have are sometimes limited by the experiences that they've had in life, or and so they don't even think about some of these opportunities that might be there. I think the other word that's very important is relevance of learning, and so that people actually see that what they're learning is connected to what they're going to do. We have in our new strategic plan, one of our 3 metrics is that all of our degrees and programs have embedded career relevance, and we just completed an audit of all of our college degrees and programs to make sure that we are actually aligning what people learn with what they want to do, so that they learn that earlier. I mean, I think, we've done this well in some areas. In some areas, we haven't done it at all. So exposing students early to the full plethora of opportunities that are out there. And then as they get older, nudging them to the places that they might most likely be successful, knowing that it's still personal choice. But they're doing that with a better awareness of what those jobs and careers actually look like. And that really requires a partnership between K-12, higher ed, and the employer community. And that many people will actually get their best opportunities when they're out there working with an employer. So we are really doubling down on internships, apprenticeship, work-based experiences of all kinds.
Thank you. Important. So we had another question in from the group asking, so we spent a lot of time on what the system and institutions that you lead have to do and what your responsibilities are. This question was what role third-party organizations, intermediaries, college access orgs can and should play in supporting the work that we're talking about here today. Do you have thoughts on how important it is to have vibrant third-party organizations, and any examples in your states or communities of groups that are really making a huge difference on this?
So for us, Matt, and Teresa really talked about this, the importance of really having industry partners and having internships and job shadowing. So we are building that into all of our dual credit and early college programs, and we're expanding those aggressively across our high schools. And one of the things I'll tell you, it makes such a big difference for our students, especially when they're able to just see what the work looks like. I had a group of students that did a cybersecurity internship because they were really interested in that and curious about that. And I'll tell you, they came back even that much more motivated to go into computer science and technology. And so I think and we can't do that by ourselves. We have amazing partnerships with our higher ed institutions, and that is I think that continues to get stronger every year. But I think we're just at the beginning of really exploring how do we get partnerships with industry. And we have an organization here called San Antonio Works that they help us bridge that. So it's an organization that was formed by the county and the city that brings industry partners together, because sometimes that's probably the biggest challenge for us is how do we navigate all the different companies and industries within cities. So that's just an area that I would put out there that I think we just need more help with to help coordinate that.
I also think that I absolutely agree with that. And I also think this outreach with community, faith-based organizations, student success programs that exist on the outside. We have a program called Starfish, which actually provides extra support for our 21st Century Scholars programs from high school all the way to the time that they go to college. So I think finding the places where people see trusted advisors to them, where they can hear their message and can say to them, did you know that you would be good at this in a way that they maybe never thought of before, but someone who they trust and who they know would tell them that. So we're really trying to, at a local and regional level, reach out to those kinds of organizations and have them be our partners, have them say often sometimes things that we don't ever really get the opportunity in a personal way. We also have an organization through the commission called Learn More Indiana, which is our attempt to reach actually in K-12 and higher ed to be the on the ground, one place where people can get all the information they need, and they partner with all kinds of organizations in Indiana around a shared goal of really student success in law, and then really meaningful careers in life. And so it doesn't stop just at high school or college, it goes all the way through to bringing adults back. So I think it's using every kind of partnership you can imagine, employers, educators, institutions, philanthropy, everything you can around a shared goal of improving the preparation and opportunities and economic mobility for your people.
Thank you. Great question. We've seen some really great examples, not only in Texas and Indiana, but some other states of these third-party organizations that have been created to create that connective tissue between, whether it's between higher ed and K-12, or Pedro, as you said, with employers, which is even harder. And we just speaking with a really impressive group, Achieve Atlanta, earlier today, and the amount of work it takes to create those bridges and set those tables and create those partnerships is significant, and especially in the environment you're in now, where you're practically in crisis management all the time, just to keep the lights on. I think it's really important to remember that these kinds of entities can play a really helpful role, something we're really interested in. One more question from the field before we wrap up. It's an interesting question. What can state policymakers do to network their districts or regions that want to work together to share lessons and improve performance? If it's not a statewide mandate or a policy like we heard in Texas, is there some kind of other step or additional step that could be taken to create a kind of a community of practice, if you will, across districts to help you learn from each other? And you could argue the same thing with post-secondary institutions, but let's just start with the K-12 level. Have you seen examples of this? Any thoughts and reactions to that question?
So I think, Matt, and I have a lot of respect for my colleagues across the country in K-12. I mean, these are difficult, unprecedented times, and I think overall on the margin, we're doing a phenomenal job of protecting our staff and children as we manage through this pandemic. But I do know that we also react quite a bit to accountability. We react to strong state visions. So I would start with having a strong state vision around post-secondary, both access and preparedness, as well as eventually post-secondary success. And I think, that varies state by state, but I think, and I know Indiana is a great model for us, but it really, for me, and I'm seeing Texas really now trying to become a leader in this, I think it starts there, a common vision around that, aligning the accountability system. And then, like we said, Matt, having financial incentives, right? So instead of not just a hammer, but also the incentives, and frankly, you can start small. They can be phased in, but as long as it's tied to the right metrics. And so once you do that, that then creates a conversation. That creates a conversation because I would argue that most of my colleagues across the country, we're collaborative by nature. Like we're trying to figure out how to problem solve, and we pick each other's brain quite a bit for that. And many times when we have a common vision, when we have common metrics and some incentives, it's really easy then for us to say, and we, for example, here in Texas, we're set up by regions. We get together during this pandemic, we're getting together every week. We do a Zoom call every week just to literally share ideas. I think, and we were doing it, about once a month before, but even during those monthly meetings, we're talking about best practices. So I think, many states already have those kind of setups, but I think what's key is the vision, and then again, any financial incentives, even if they have to be phased in.
I think a state vision is very important. We actually, we started a few years ago. We have a governor's workforce cabinet here that I'm currently chairing, but it brings together K-12, higher ed, employers, all at the same place around our attainment goals. And then I think you have to take a state strategy and you have to regionalize it or localize it to the people who are implementing it. We have designated talent regions around the state of Indiana, which brings together at the local or regional level a group sort of comparable to our state group. And they start with data. They drive all the data that they have currently in that area. They set goals of where they're trying to move their numbers, everything from high school graduation, college attainment, wage, the number of employers they're recruiting, in-state migration, and they have all kinds of things. But they do that at the local and regional level. So they bring the life to the state plan, which I think is critically important as well. But I think a lot of it has to do with leadership, having the right people at the table, a sense of collaboration, shared goals, and a commitment to actually do this in tough times as well as, I'm waiting for a time that isn't tough actually, but for all times, and not to let something like COVID get in the way of the big picture.
Really well put. And I think in both Texas and Indiana are great examples from our perspective at ESG of states that have set that vision, sustained it, and put resources and incentives behind it. And it really makes a difference. That's why we're highlighting you today. And I think sometimes it's the governor's role that can set that table, as Teresa mentioned. In Texas' case, it's also the legislature that can step forward and put some, resources and incentives behind it. But at the end of the day, I agree that it does come back to leadership. One quick, Teresa, follow-up question from the audience about 21st Century Scholars program, which you mentioned earlier has been so successful. What's the scale of it? How many students participate each year in that program?
We usually have about 100,000 students from sign up to those who are in college. At any given year, we usually have about 19,000 who are in college, 19 to 20,000. You have to keep this in perspective. We're not a state as big as Texas, so scale it down. We have about 6.5 million Hoosiers. So it's a big program. We have had 40,000 students who have graduated from college with the scholarship. It's available to those who go to public or private schools. We don't provide all the coverage for the private schools, but they often wrap around the extra funding. So, we talked earlier about it's an expensive program, but it's easy for us to prove the return on investment for this program in terms of what those students contribute to the state, in terms of added wage, taxes they pay, their health themselves, all the ways in which you would want higher education to have a return on investment. We see that with the 21st Century Scholars Program that far exceed the cost of that program.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, so we're nearing the final minutes here. I want to give each of you a chance just to share any closing thoughts, and feel free to be provocative or mention anything you're particularly concerned about. If you wanted to, give some some advice to your peers on what might be most important and where you're kind of looking around the corner next. And then I'll wrap things up in just a few minutes.
Yes. So Matt, for me, I just think it's so important to understand the huge economic opportunity we have by helping our children, especially children of color and poverty, to access post-secondary, options to help them be stronger in their completion rates. Of course, that starts with access and preparation, which K-12 we own. But, I think there's just such a huge opportunity for our country, especially if there's anything that this pandemic has taught us, is that, when we have economic and wealth gaps, they only get magnified during these types of times. Whenever there's a recession, whenever there's any kind of anything that happens, that's disastrous in our country, it mostly disproportionately affects our people, our families of poverty, our families of color. And so I just see a great opportunity for us to really, set some strong visions. And frankly, I'm the first in my family to graduate from high school and graduate from college. All my siblings have finished or are finishing college because of the decisions I've made. So we know that education is the key to help economic mobility. And it's also the key to ensuring that our communities are strong. So again, I just urge, for people to look at the study that you talked about earlier, and that to really look at those data points and really set policies across states, because in the long run, there's going to be significant payoffs. And Teresa said it the best: the return on investment will be very visible as you give these programs time.
We often refer to education as being the great equalizer, and it is, but it can also be the great divider if the benefits only accrue to some. And so I think it's been clear to us that we know education beyond high school is more important than ever, and we need to make sure we don't leave behind people in that. I think it starts with it helps to have a strategic plan that actually is your North Star where you're going, and have buy-in to that. You have to be willing to use the data and not walk away from that data, even when you don't like what the data say. And then you need to provide the support system so that, in fact, it isn't just you have this information, but you're driving policies, funding, and programs that change it. And then I think it really relies on partnerships, a broad range of partnerships where you are committed to the big goal of getting more of the people in your state prepared for the 21st century economy.
Very well said, both of you. I appreciate it. I want to let folks know that in the chat box, we're putting links to the reports and some kind of one-pagers coming out of the recommendations for that report that I mentioned earlier. You'll see on the screen just a visual here, but if you go to the chat bar and you want to click the links, you'll be able to access more material from this report that I mentioned earlier, and the recommendations that have come out of looking at the highest performing districts and states. We are actively looking for communities across the country that want to drive more aggressively on these metrics, and as Superintendent Martinez said, build policy around them. In the coming year, we're hopeful to support more communities that want to do that, and possibly even create a network across the country of school systems and ideally states that want to make this a high priority. We think it could be game-changing for the country and really make a big difference in the lives of many, many students. As I mentioned earlier, 1 million a year are not going on to post-secondary. 1 million a year are not getting the opportunities for economic mobility that the superintendent and Commissioner Lubbers have mentioned. We really think we have to reduce that number dramatically, and it's going to take state and local leadership to do it. So thanks very much to Teresa and Pedro for joining me today. Thanks to Excel and Ed for making this opportunity for us available. Look forward to working with all of you. Keep up the good fight and stay safe. Have a great rest of your day.